Hey, that's your guy. So the cameras, rather than label them camera one, camera two, camera three, or whatever, I have been reading a lot about, I don't know, brain chemistry or whatever, and it's easier just to anthropomorphize them and make, and so it's like, well, I don't care what their name is. So this one happened to end with D0H.
Yes.
So I named it Doe.
Okay.
So it's Doe, Irk, and Ika. That's just happens to be the end of their serial numbers on there. But now, because they're so dead simple, I'm able to do like, we were talking last night about like road gigs. All of a sudden I could capture little moments.
Yeah.
Bother to go all the way to Florida just to get 3 minutes on stage.
Yeah.
And so on. But you already do that, don't you? With your, because I see on your LinkedIn all your food blogging stuff.
Yeah.
Like you do an extraordinary amount of travel for that.
Yeah, but the travel is almost never for that. It's for something else. And when I go there, I do food stuff.
But that's the brilliant part, right? It's like if you're going anywhere, it's in Hollywood, do they call it stealing shots? Like a forest happens to be on fire, and so you do a fight scene in front of it?
Yeah, that's kind of what it is, yes. And so every time, that's how this whole thing, that's how my whole recent thing got started, was because Josh and I were on tour for Mission Hill. We had that show called Mission Hill after we left.
Which was the first time I ever pegged your name to anything. Like I missed your whole background with the Simpsons. Bill Oakley did not mean the Simpsons to me. Bill Oakley, to be honest, the whole reason. To go all the way back. I guess the whole reason that led to this wasn't
it Space 1969?
Correct.
Yeah.
And I was like, who is this? And then it says something Mission Hill. And I don't know if I saw it on a social post or something, but I loved Mission Hill from Adult Swim. And so I jumped into Space 1969, was blown away by Space 1969. And I think you were one of my latest victims of just the unironic fan letter. I'm trying to be better about just always, because nobody minds getting an email of like genuine praise.
Oh, right. No, for sure. So that was, anyway, Mission Hill, it was the 25th anniversary of Mission Hill last year and the year before, kind of. So Josh and I were on tour. We had a producer, and we showed, Mission Hill cannot be streamed anywhere. And so we showed episodes in fully restored episodes in movie theaters around the country. And so every time we'd go to one of these cities, like many cities I had never been to before, like Cincinnati and Pittsburgh, I would be like, what food can I have here that I never could have anywhere else? And that's how this whole thing started that I'm currently doing. Is like in Pittsburgh, I had the Ohio Valley style pizza, for example. Cincinnati, I had the Cincinnati chili, and things like that. And so what I'm doing now with these ticketed dinners is I'm composing a menu of entirely of weird regional foods and serving an entire evening of them while I give a funny talk about that subject.
Wait, yeah. Well, so wow, a lot of open loops that we get to dive into.
Yes.
So I guess for any, you know what? I keep on doing it. I decided when I started doing these interviews that I was going to start with one question, and so far I'm 0 for 2 on starting with this question. So I'm going to do it now. Bill, when did you know you were different from everyone else?
Probably when I was like 12 or whatever, that I was really into things like cartooning, drawing, and Mad Magazine and National Lampoon to an extent that no normie had ever heard of that stuff.
Where and when were you 12?
In D.C.
Okay.
See, I grew up when I was between the ages of 0 and 10. I lived on a farm in rural Maryland, and my brother and sister had already gone to college. So I spent a lot of time by myself there, either playing outside or rummaging through our attic. And our attic had a huge collection of old Mad magazines that my brother had bought in the 1960s that I read over and over and over again. And that's kind of where all this whole thing started, because I wanted to be a cartoonist and copied the drawings from Mad. But I also was interested in TV and TV cartoons and things like that. And that's kind of where this whole thing started. It's also where the whole food thing started, too, because back then, McDonald's advertised to kids all the time.
Oh,
when
yeah.
they had the Grimace and McDonald's Land cookies and stuff like that, right? And we didn't have McDonald's. This was before McDonald's was everywhere. The nearest one was 60 miles away. So I'd get to go on my birthday, maybe. And so the fact that I wanted McDonald's all the time and never got it is what led me into this current career of being food, not so much fast food anymore, but it started out as entirely fast food.
Well, so we talked last night a bit about the strange cultural artifact of so Mad Magazine is of the moment when it's coming out, but then they get assembled into books that go through the proper stores, but by the time you and I encounter them, they're in the dollar stores, and we just like them because it's got cartoons and they're funny. But we were talking about our shared experience of that's how we understand the 1950s and 60s is through the lens of their countercultural take.
Absolutely.
Did you know that at the time, or what was the appeal to Mad Magazine in particular?
It presented a worldview that you did not see elsewhere at that time. Now, the world is saturated with that worldview. Saturated. And back then, Mad was the only thing that was like that kids could see. Occasionally there might be a Saturday morning cartoon that had a little bit of a counterculture vibe, but very rarely because they're very mainstream. So Mad was the only thing that kind of was like, don't trust authority. Madison Avenue is trying to rip you off. Authority figures are pretentious and don't know what they're talking about. Things like that. And you never see that anywhere. Now, as I said, starting with the whole kind of like Saturday Night Live, National Lampoon, David Letterman type of thing between like 1975 and 1995, the world became awash in that point of view to an extent that it's probably there's too much of that kind of stuff now, especially with the internet. But that at the time, that was the only thing like that. And Mad, the release of Mad, which only came out once every 8 weeks, was an incredible moment because it would arrive and you'd be like this, what you'd see in a store or you'd get it in the mail and it'd be like an hour or two of pure undistilled magic. And then maybe if you're desperate, you would buy Cracked sometime in the next couple of weeks, or even like Sick or cartoons when those were still around, and that would be it. Because that's the kind of thing was not on. There was nothing like that on TV. There was nothing like that for kids anywhere.
Well, and so my experience, and I think we had the same attraction, is like in my case, we moved around a lot. So you got all the kids who grew up together, the kind of in group. Mm-hmm. Did you perceive yourself as in my mind, I always thought of myself as a weirdo, or did you like what? Was Mad something that you enjoyed alone or with close friends, or
not until Josh Weinstein arrived? Interestingly, I enjoyed it alone. But in 9th grade, those who know my history know that Josh Weinstein is my best friend, and we worked together for 30 years. There wasn't barely anybody that shared that sensibility and point of view until this kid named Josh Weinstein showed up at our school in 9th grade.
Yeah.
And then we were like, it was clear that we were meant to be good friends. And then, we worked together for 30 years.
Yeah. Okay. So I was testing my theory, and I'm glad it turned out to be right, because that's kind of how it almost was like a bat signal. Like, anyone else weird? Anyone else get this joke? Anyone else recognize that I'm referencing this thing? And so then you two click and get along famously. I know that there's some gap where I know that finally post Simpsons, Mission Hill was a passion project for you guys.
Yeah.
Tell me about the gap in between, because you're friends, and then is he along for the Simpsons ride?
Yeah,
or?
Well, we were best friends in high school. We went to separate colleges, and the thing about it is we started this humor magazine. I started humor magazine. Josh was the executive editor. I was editor in chief. But what happened was we both worked for the school newspaper, and there was the back page was where the funny stuff was in the paper, right? And I really wanted to be a back page editor, and I did not get it. And then I was like, well, fuck these. Can I curse on this?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
Go for it.
Fuck these guys. I'm starting my own magazine. The humor magazine that we worked on was better than the average college humor magazine at the time. It was 40 pages, slickly printed. It was amazing with really good cards, some of the best artists in the school and stuff. It was really good, and it was infinitely cooler than the newspaper. So I was very, very glad.
So you did you know you were one of the first alt rags in school?
For sure. It was a big deal, and I'm 99% sure that was what got me into Harvard too, because my grades were good, but they weren't. I wasn't spectacular in any way, but the fact that I had created this magazine that was honestly better than 90% of existing college humor magazines was impressive enough to the admissions office It wasn't impressive enough to the admissions office at Stanford, where Josh got in, and I wanted to go, but I got rejected. So we were hoping to go to college together, but I didn't get in to Stanford, and I ended up having to go to Harvard, my safety school.
Now, was this a case? I know that Harvard's reputation is different today than it was back then. Now it's such a juggernaut behemoth. It represents the pinnacle of a 18-year tournament that every crop of middle class Americans aspires to, or whatever. Like, was it that intimidating at that time?
No, it was a little. I mean, obviously, it's America's oldest university. It is very stuffy. It wasn't considered. College wasn't quite as much of a big deal back when we went to college 30 years ago, when it only cost $8,000 to go to Harvard every year. And
wow.
I think it probably actually cost like 12. But also, like, it was much easier to get into. Like, now, it's as hard to get into, for instance, Boston College as it was to get into Harvard back then. And so, like, it was much easier to get in, but it was mainly stuff, like, it wasn't quite the same. There's still a lot of very impressive people, obviously, like Bill Gates and so forth, but it wasn't quite this weird isolated freak show that it is today. It was much more still of the kind of the old school preppy.
It almost is like
thing.
a child beauty pageant, kind of weirdly.
Yes.
Yes. Well-to-do and hyper-attentive parents work for 18 years so that they could put their child on display.
That didn't exist back then.
Yeah.
Like, it was more like stuffy old people who went to prep school type thing. And it wasn't, parents really didn't pay much attention to their kids all the way up till about 1995.
That sounds outrageous, but it is 100%
Yes.
true. Like anybody who's young, they're like, that's crazy talk. No, I mean, it's like, and also even weirdly, it wasn't parents' job to pay attention to their kids. That would be weird back then.
I can't express everybody. It sounds preposterous, but you would leave the house and you take your bicycle, and the parents would just be like, be home by dark. And that would be it. They had no way to contact you, no way to know where you were even. And that was normal, for almost everybody in America back then. And they did not, my parents don't recall, they paid any attention to where I was applying to college at all, and that kind of thing. So it wasn't, there was none of this weird helicopter parenting type stuff.
Yeah. Well, and nowadays, I suppose the modern day analog would be like, I've got a 17-year-old, and what she does on the internet is a black box. And I am certain that 30 years from now, she's going to be telling her kids, it was the weirdest thing. Mom and Dad just didn't care where I went on the internet.
Right.
I went anywhere.
That's a good analog. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. So you connect with Josh, and it's a medium big deal to even apply to Harvard. You're bummed that he gets into Stanford, and you take Harvard as a consolation prize.
And well, the thing about the saving grace of Harvard was it was the home of the Harvard Lampoon. And the Harvard Lampoon is, for those who don't know, is the nation's, I think it's now the world's oldest humor magazine. And it was the best, the apex of the college humor magazine back when every college had a humor magazine. Mm-hmm. And it's an organization, it's also a social organization to some extent, and they have a building. One of the things that is the coolest aspect of the Lampoon is that they have a castle. It's not a huge castle, but it's a very unusual building in Harvard Square that was paid for by William Randolph Hearst back when he was a graduate back in 1909. And it's a beautiful place, and it's a beautiful thing to be a membership. So I did, because of my cartooning skills, I was able to get on, like, you can't also at Harvard, you can't just walk in and say, I would like to work on newspaper. There's a competition for every one of these things. There's a competition, and they only let on 9 people per year or whatever. So I was fortunate enough to be able to draw cartoons well enough to get onto Lampoon immediately.
So in that case, you had a gift and you had a particular set of skills that were unquestionable.
Yes, anybody can see. The thing, it's getting on the Harvard Lampoon for writing is annoyingly hard because everyone disagrees as to what's funny, right? But for cartooning, every dope can see that that's a good cartoon.
Right.
It's drawn well. It doesn't matter if it's funny. That person can draw. We need people who can draw. So I was able to get on right away, and that was when Conan O'Brien was president of the Lampoon. And
wait, so you worked with Conan?
Yes.
It's so funny. It is so odd to lose myself talking to my friend Bill, and then to hear Gods of Olympus just casually mentioned. Harvard and Conan and so on. So yes. What year-ish?
This is 84.
Okay.
85, and Conan was president. Conan was 2-term president. He was elected president as a junior and then again as a senior, or rather as a sophomore, then as a junior. So he. And he wasn't around all that much because he was writing his thesis at the time. But he was around when I got on, and we saw him, and we were friends. And then obviously, I wasn't really friends with him then, but we would encounter each other again 4 years later at The Simpsons.
Okay, so to him, he's just the boss, and mainly. So as a cartoonist, especially one with a whip smart sense of humor, I would imagine that there are little places that you get to inject yourself in the story, like a couple. Like, were you there for the writers' meeting, or they would just hand you what they wanted, or
it evolved over time? The first thing I did was actually a comic strip, a series of comic strips written by Conan that they gave me the scripts for, and I had to draw them to make them look like Archie, right? And then over time, like the next couple things I did were things that I made up myself that were just comic strips that I wrote and drew. And then as time went on, I was like, there's a lot of people who can draw better than me here, but I can write. So I basically stopped drawing so much. Although I drew some covers and I drew some comic strips and stuff, but I also started writing pieces. And that's when I transitioned into writing, was kind of like in my junior year.
Well, okay. So at that point, you have enough seniority that you have input on there, and then so you graduate, and I assume that in your mind, it's like, well, that's all done. Where did you go right out of college?
Not really. I mean, I didn't know what I was going to do when I graduated. And I was like, maybe I should go to law school. Maybe I should do this. And so what happened was Josh and I were still working together because we had made Josh an honorary member of the Lampoon.
Yeah, this is pre-internet, so you guys are writing physical letters to each other, the occasional long-distance phone call?
Expensive long-distance phone call, yeah. But he would come stay with me in Cambridge in the summers, and we'd work on Lampoon summer projects together. Like we did a parody of USA Today that was incredibly successful. And we did a book the next year, so he would be a kind of a staff member. And then Josh and I decided that we were going to try to go into comedy writing. And that was because people, for about 7 years before that, there had been every couple of years, every year or so, 2 or 3 people would go into comedy writing for the Lampoon and would get a job, for instance, either writing at National Lampoon or writing for Letterman, or in some rare cases, Saturday Night Live. Mm-hmm. And we thought we would try to do that as well. And we did not have any success, and that's the end of chapter 1. That was like, and then we moved back. We moved back to our homes in D.C. and got other jobs doing other things.
And so this is in that anything goes post college time. Just you're taking odd jobs, I assume.
Yes, I was a temp, but then I got a very interesting job because I wanted to work in TV, and the only TV show that was not a news program in Washington D.C. was America's Most Wanted. And America's Most Wanted, this was at the height of that stuff.
Sure. This is John Walsh, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So
the show was live.
Oh, that's right.
It was a very exciting time to work there because the Fox Network was pretty new. America's Most Wanted was very famous and getting huge ratings. Along with a couple other, like Married with Children might have been on then. I'm not sure.
Those were the launch titles. Married with Children and America's Most Wanted were their hits, and the Tracy Ullman Show, which I think is a thread that will get picked up here.
Yes. So I got a job being the promotions coordinator at America's Most Wanted, which basically meant stuff like I would write the listings for TV Guide back when TV Guide was still a thing, and I would.
Would you do that weird stuff like actually buy a copy of TV Guide and think to yourself, I wrote those words?
Yeah,
because
it's exciting.
Okay, good. Because I remember in the variety arts circuit, I would do guest spots on all the daytime talk shows or whatever. But the one I remember the most is I felt like I had made it was it never even aired, but on the TiVo schedule was on Tech TV, Unscrewed with Martin Sargent, it says guest Brian Brushwood.
Yes.
And somewhere are like 75 photos of the TiVo interface and my name being on there as a guest.
It's very exciting. It is a very exciting time when that kind of thing happens.
So you're young 20s, and what was your job over at America's Most Wanted?
It was basically to do promotion and publicity and things like that. I was the only person there who did that. And so my main job, they also promoted me, and I got to write and produce promos for the show, but a lot of it was this is very dramatic, and I say we because I was involved a little bit. The show aired live, and it was very dramatic because those were actual calls coming in on the set from all over the country, and we capture guys. A lot of times guys were captured within 24 or 48 hours because someone would have seen them, and like the cops from the local jurisdictions were there, on the set. And when somebody had a call that sounded like it was real, they would get on. And so like one time we captured a guy before the show was over. He was sleeping on the bed in the motel room next to the person who had called.
Get out.
Yeah, that was amazing. And then the other time, there was an enormous time when we captured this guy, John List, who is a very famous killer who in 1969 killed his whole family and vanished. And we had a forensic sculptor come in and make what they thought John List would look like today. And it looked exactly like him. And they found him in Virginia with a whole new family and new life, and he was captured really quickly. It was that was an amazing case. So my job was to promote this stuff. So like when we captured a guy in Fresno, I would call up all the TV stations in Fresno and newspapers and say, hey, America's Most Wanted help capture this guy. Would you like some material? I can send you a videotape of our X segment on it. I can give you an interview with a reporter from our staff who found this case.
You said this is local news outlets or?
Local news outlets all over the place.
Yeah, okay, got
it. And occasionally national ones too. Like for John List, it was a national story. It was on the front page of the New York Times, as a matter of fact, when that was captured. And that was above my pay grade dealing with them. But like, so it was generally dealing with local stations.
Yeah. So, and again, I would imagine at that point, that even to being, in your young 20s, you're probably not that impressed with local news of some city you've never heard of.
It was exciting to get it on the air because then I would have a brownie point with the boss since I got us a segment on the Fresno News.
Yeah. So for you, it's just knocking them down and setting them up. And how long, at this point, I assume that your self-identity, you think of yourself as funny, but you're still casting about for your core identity.
I wanted to be I knew I wanted to be a comedy writer, and I wanted to use this as...
But you're not cracking jokes in these promos.
No.
Or are you?
It's a pretty serious set. It was people had fun, but it was a serious topic generally. So Josh and I were still continuing to try to do stuff in comedy, and we wrote a couple articles for Spy Magazine back when that was a thing. And then we got what eventually led to our big break. We got a job. We got a opportunity to audition, to write some sample material for a new show that was going to be on cable in New York on what eventually became Comedy Central. There's a channel called Ha, and they hired us. And so this was the beginning of our TV career. And
so you end your relationship with America's Most Wanted.
I was there for about a year.
Yeah,
and then amicably, they were excited that I had gotten a TV writing job. And Josh and I moved to New York and worked for cable comedy shows for about a year and a half.
And did you and Josh put yourself out always as a team?
Yeah.
Or okay. Yeah. So and there was no sense that one of you was going to run off and so
yeah, that came later. It wasn't that we ran. It wasn't that we ran off.
I just stepped into foreshadowing.
It was only became much later when we both had all these kids, and so we're like, we can't keep splitting a salary. That's what happened.
Got it. So, and I could totally picture the conversation where it's like, hey, there's two of you. Like, do you cost twice as much? No, same price. They're like, okay, fine.
That's also, there's actually a Writers Guild rule too, that when you have a team, like, I think they may have changed this rule, but on variety shows, such as Letterman, for example, you can't have teams. So they would have to have paid us two salaries to be on Letterman or Saturday Night Live back then, and we were not worth two salaries to those places, you know?
But the two of you together were definitely worth more than one salary.
Well, you would think so. But that we always got one salary for most of our careers. So that was anyway. So what happened was then we got our big break to move to LA. The person who had been our editor at Spy Magazine for those articles got hired to be the head writer of a new comedy variety show in LA, and he hired us to be writers. And that show was an immense flop. That was, even though it was very talented, very, very talented staff of people on that show, but it was a comedy variety show on at 7 on Sunday, opposite 60 Minutes during the entirety of the Gulf War, the first Gulf War. So it didn't have really much of a shot. So
Gulf War I was the first media war of my lifetime because I wasn't there for Vietnam, and I'd assume you were too young to notice then. Yes. But that, all of a sudden there were new wonderful toys that media people could play with to get live boots on the ground reporting and so on. There was a hot minute where America was addicted to exciting news about, the whole world kicking Saddam Hussein's ass.
And that whole thing with the Stud art. Remember that?
The Patriot
and all
versus
those guys,
Scud.
the whole CNN with the first time that people were like, oh, there's Bernard Shaw. Is that his name?
And, Bernard Shaw and Wolf Blitzer was in the field before he was the anchor.
And the Scud Stud was on NBC, as I recall. But yeah, that was a big. So our show didn't have much of a chance during that time.
Yeah. Okay, but did you know that at the time, or did it just feel like when a project doesn't land and you enter that phase of self-reflection, did you doubt yourself, or was it clear to you?
We were too low on the totem pole to have that concern. We were because we were the new guys, we were just writers on the show. We weren't paying attention to any of that. We were just writing the material until they said the show was canceled, And it was good thing was that it got us to move to LA, got us into the Writers Guild. It paid really well for 10 weeks, or whatever, and that was it was a good entree into the business. But then then comes the weird time, which I think I told you about before.
I don't know if you have, and in this context, I don't know if you have to be delicate about anything. But
no, this was the time where we were like, this may not be the career for us, because we were in LA. It wasn't cheap to live in LA.
No,
but both of us were on unemployment, and we knew that we wanted to be writers on sitcoms, right? And to be a writer on a sitcom, the traditional way to get hired is to write what is known as a spec script.
Yeah.
Where you write a script for no money. You write a script for your favorite show, which could at that time have been Cheers or something like that.
Essentially, you turn in fan fiction and say, "What if this was an episode?"
Precisely.
Yeah.
And it demonstrates that you can write a funny show in the voice. You could be an employee of someone else's someone else's show, right? And
which actually is good advice, for anybody trying to figure out their place to where, just show up and keep showing up until they don't know how to do it without you, and then you can ask for a salary.
It's really like having people who can turn in material. It's very helpful to have people who can write material in the proper voice of the show, because most people, even people employed by the show, can't often do it, and everybody gets to go home early when the script is good, So anyway, so we had at that time our spec script was a script for a show called Coach. You may remember.
Oh,
Coach, right? Craig T. Nelson.
Yeah, Craig T. Nelson, who later The Incredibles, but before that, Poltergeist. Yeah.
Yes, and it was a show about a coach at a Midwestern college, a football coach, right? And this show was not considered to be a very good show.
I liked it, all right.
But the thing is, this only became clear, we were like, this is just as good as your average episode of Coach. But that didn't give a shit because nobody thought Coach was very good.
They were like, talking about damning with faint praise.
Right.
It's the funniest Coach yet.
It was. I probably wasn't, but it was the same as it was an average episode of Coach, and nobody cared. And this is what finally somebody told us. Somebody we worked with years later was like, the only person who ever tells you the truth, because as they've said, Hollywood is the only business where you can die of encouragement. Right? Have you heard that phrase?
No, I haven't, but that is true.
It's so true. And everybody...
And I, growing up in the meat grinder of starting off street performing and doing the variety arts, I was so confused by the bizarre polite society of Hollywood, where it was like, oh, you're the best. Everything, this is the best project. Oh, it's going to change life. It's just that, I don't understand that that's the Hollywood equivalent of saying, give up, kill yourself.
You're so
None
right.
of this is going to be anywhere.
It's so true. It's so true. So that's what you're getting. We're getting a lot of people who are like, oh, this is good, you'll get your chance, whatever. And then one guy who finally was connected by a friend of ours, this guy we didn't know, we took our coach over to him and he called and said, look, guys, it's very clear from this script that you don't like this show, Coach, very much. He's like, you should write another script. This is just not going to cut it. And we were like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Oh, God damn it. And at this point, we were both considering other careers. And I had already decided, okay, well, this career is not for me. I'm going to I'm going to get a job at the State Department. And I sent away for the Foreign Service exam, the practice one. And it was so freaking hard. I was like, I had a pretty good knowledge of world events and whatnot. This was a whole new level.
I read the New York Times.
I didn't read the New York Times, but I watched CNN.
Yeah.
I knew who this Scud Stud was. And so I was like, this was complicated things about the inner politics of Azerbaijan and things like that. And I was like, okay. I saw this test and I was like, let's write another script. This is what happened. I was like, forget this other thing. Our unemployment was running out, so the clock was on us. And we were like, let's write another script and do what that guy said, and it will be for a show that we really like, and we're going to give it the old college try before we give up. Okay? So there was a show that had just come on called the Seinfeld Chronicles. At this point.
Wow!
And the Seinfeld Chronicles had only been on for I think it was 4 episodes maybe, or it was going to its second season. But it was not a popular show, but we thought it was really funny. And so we had a really good idea based on something that had actually happened to me, where I thought I had swallowed a piece of broken glass, but I wasn't sure. And the doctor said the only way to know is when your poop comes out, what color it is. You know this. I'm sure you know this.
Well, as somebody who professionally eats glass, yes.
You know it, and you know it well. So it was a funny thing that's a very George Costanza type of predicament.
Yep.
So we wrote it like that, and immediately everything suddenly changed. It was like this show, many people hadn't even heard of the show, but the script was beloved. We were so happy.
So did it see air?
No, it did not. But spec scripts usually don't see air. But what I'll tell you what happened with this is like we immediately got a new agent who was like, this is great. And then he started sending it out to places. We started having meetings. We started having meetings at all the places, all the big shows at the time, like Cheers and Murphy Brown and things like that. And we were like, holy shit, this has worked really well.
This is happening. Yeah.
And places wanted to hire us, and even the Simpsons, the guys at the Simpsons who were running the Simpsons at the time, Mike Reese and Al Jean, who I think had heard of us because they were also Lampoon members, or we'd met them once or twice.
And the Simpsons was fully established in its own series at this point?
Yes, it was a huge smash hit.
Yeah.
It was this.
Okay, so you knew to be, were you intimidated as you were taking all these meetings?
We were so intimidated. It was amazing. It was amazing to have these meetings, and it was shocking every time we were like, "Oh, they want to meet you at Cheers." We're like, "Holy shit, that's the royalty! You can't get any better than that."
Oh yeah.
And the Simpsons was a special thing even back then because the Simpsons was not your average show. It was a show. People thought it was the coolest show of all time, and also the writer. It wasn't just regular old sitcom writers. Like the writers at Cheers, God bless them, were all very professional, seasoned sitcom writers. Most of the writers at The Simpsons were guys who had never worked on sitcoms before. They are guys who all come from unusual backgrounds or had come from Letterman or SNL. They were not your sitcom writers, and also it was kind of an impenetrable fortress. They didn't hire people at The Simpsons, you know. So what happened was Mike Reese and Al Jean read our Seinfeld script, even though apparently only one of them had heard of Seinfeld at that time, and they thought it was really funny, and they said, let's give these guys a freelance episode. So they called us in, they asked if we'd make up some stories. They didn't like our stories, but they had one to assign us that was an episode that Conan had made up called Marge Gets a Job. And Conan was the only person that they had hired since the original staff at that time. And so we wrote Marge Gets a Job. We wrote a draft of it.
Marge Gets a Job, that's not the infidelity one, is it?
No, it's the one where Marge gets up working at the plant and Mr. Burns falls in love with her.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
From the 4th season. So we wrote that, and it's like writing a Simpsons script is really hard. Like, it's not like writing a regular sitcom because a regular sitcom, you're limited. Oh, we got 6 sets. We got the bar.
Right.
We got Jerry's apartment. We got 5 characters. The Simpsons, it's like any minute you can have an itchy and scratchy. You can have a fantasy and blah, blah, blah. So we put a lot of that stuff in. And like our script, every script of The Simpsons is heavily rewritten. But
before we get too far in that part, I would love to get a sense of, so you've got heat, you're taking meetings, and you're getting to experience the different flavors of comedy out there. So you know this is the home you want, and now you're picking out an apartment in
right. Well, we hadn't gotten any offers yet. But we were a commodity, I guess.
Yeah.
So anyway, they assigned us The Simpsons, and the fact that we had gotten a freelance assignment on The Simpsons made us even more of a commodity.
When you say they's your agent, or they's Fox, or like
The Simpsons, the head writers had given us this assignment.
Got it. Okay, got it. So they at this point they bought in based on your talented spec script.
But it wasn't a job. It was you got to write this one script and then you leave.
There we go.
And that's what it was.
So you got a gig.
Yes.
Got it.
But getting an assignment to write on The Simpsons at the time was a huge thing.
Of course. You worked a gig with The Simpsons.
Right.
Yeah.
So other places were duly excited and wanted to meet with us even more, right? So what happened is we ended up getting, and then that was the last we heard from The Simpsons. We were like, well, that was good. Thank you guys, did a good job, thank you, whatever.
And so they're probably not in the business of keeping you up to date of how your gig.
We got invited to the table read, and we saw that they had rewritten the script heavily, but there was a little bit of our stuff in there, but we only later found out that's par for the course.
Yeah.
So it didn't matter though, because we were already getting other offers. And so we got a staff job offer.
Did you get credited on that That's
Yeah.
spec script. Okay, great. Because I know credit is its own currency in Hollywood.
At The Simpsons, generally, the person who wrote the first draft gets the credit no matter how much rewritten they are. But in any case, that was it. It was kind of like, thank you guys, you did a good job. See you, right? And so then meanwhile, we were we're going to get a job. We got an offer from another show that was a new show from the creator of Murphy Brown, and it was called Love and War. And it was I don't even remember who the star of it was, but it was a big deal because she was a huge deal at that time, Diane English, and we were very, very honored that they gave us a job. And so they were buying they had to set up our office, they were getting our computers all set up, and I was like to Josh, like, God bless them for giving us this job, but I just don't know if we're writing romantic comedy is our thing. Like, we don't know the first thing about writing romantic comedy, and I'm glad they have faith in this. And so we called our agent. Are
either of you dating or married at this point?
I was married, but I still wasn't like, I'd never seen any romantic movies. I don't know the first thing about writing that. And if you've seen our writing, we're not really writers of romance.
Right.
So we call our agent, and we're like, and this is one of the things that I always tell people. I was like, it doesn't hurt to ask. I said, we called up our agent and said, would you just please call those guys at The Simpsons and ask if there's any way that they would just give us a job.
Wow. So at some point you're like, this is the path, nothing to lose. Let's roll the dice. You never know unless you ask. And so you just asked. And
they gave us a job.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so the position.
It was a coincidence because they had a team, Jake Hogan and Wally Wolodarski, who had been there since day one, who were suddenly leaving. So they had an office for two guys, and they had a vacancy. And although like our script hadn't really blown anyone away to the point, it hadn't blown anyone away to the point that they hired us back then. Mm-hmm. Now 5 months later, they did hire us, and it was only because I swear, if we hadn't had our agent call and ask them, they wouldn't have hired us.
Yeah,
but then they did because the timing was perfect. So it's like, that's one of the lessons I always tell people is like, if we hadn't made that phone call, our whole career would have been entirely different.
Yeah, well, it's one of those like, lately I'm real obsessed with the mechanics of what makes for a successful career. And one of the things in this book, the formula is, statistically speaking, you must keep on showing up. And like, for example, Albert Einstein died believing that his cosmological constant was his biggest mistake. Turns out that paper is now cited more than his theory of special and general relativity and so on. I'm getting all those facts wrong, but somebody could look it up, and the spirit of it is true. But and likewise, that big wave over Hokusai, the famous Japanese block art one. I believe that dude was nearly 90 when he made that one, and it was, and of course, is the iconic one that you came up. So that instinct of swinging for the fences and continuing to swing on the fences is what lets you cross that barrier on the inside. So what was it like day one? Because you're deeply intimidated.
It was shocking. It was really hard to believe. And when I think back on the day or two after this, I just couldn't believe it. Because it was like, it was one of those things where it was kind of like the day that Conan got selected to be the Letterman's replacement. It was like, this is fucking unbelievable that this happened, because we were like, this is the most elite writer's room since SNL 1976, or Sid Caesar 1959, when Woody Allen and Larry Gelbart and Neil Simon all worked in that same room together. There is kind of this every generation there's a slot for an emerging place for subversive comedy, still in the mainstream spotlight though.
Yeah, and I would imagine that you had a very clear sense by season 3 or 4, whenever you came in, like you had to know that, oh my God, we are riding the wave.
Yes. We were so intimidated. Also, we had never worked on a sitcom before. And we didn't even literally know what was going to be the day-to-day, what the work was like, because they gave us the title of story editors, which is actually the second lowest. They didn't give us the lowest title. They gave us the second lowest title, very nice of them. And we were like, we're going to be editing the stories? We're going to see... I literally didn't know what we were going to do.
Right.
It actually just turns out that's just one of the titles. The titles are based on how long you've been there. So we went there not knowing what was going to happen. We also thought that James L. Brooks was going to be in the writer's room every day with us, that Matt Groening was going to be in the writer's room every day with us, and that there was going to be a lot of actual writing, which was very intimidating. But actually, the majority of what you do is sit in the writer's room all day long.
Yeah. So can you demystify this part of the process? Because I don't know, 20 years ago when I heard about Hollywood writers, I pictured a very introverted, sitting at a typewriter. Here is capital T, capital S.
Movie writers.
The script, right? Yeah. But realistically, it's just kind of hanging around bullshitting and saying what if, and then somebody writes something down on a whiteboard. Is that more what it's like? Or
it depends on the show, but in general, yes. Like if you have a job, let's just say on a regular either sitcom or drama, that 80% of your time is sitting in the writer's room. The other 20% of the time is you're writing a draft or something like that. Like there's always, The Simpsons, for example, maybe there were 10 writers, and there were always 2 or 3 people out writing a draft, a first or second draft or an outline. And everyone else was in the room, and the room is a relentless grind of hard work all day long, every day. And it's not that fun. And it's like, okay, we need a better title for this itchy and scratchy thing. Okay, moving on to the next line. Now, Homer says this doesn't hook up to what we have in Act 2, so we need to rewrite this. It has to be funny. And then everybody sits there for 20 minutes like, okay, well, what if it was this? What if it was that? And people don't shoot down. It's very unkosher to shoot down somebody's pitch. So you just silence.
That Hollywood dance. Oh, it's the best idea. You're going to be famous. Nobel's on the phone. Just one thing.
That's the executives talk that way. The writers, good writers, you don't criticize other person's pitch. You just don't laugh at it. And then finally, when you get a pitch everyone laughs at, that's generally the one that goes up. Sometimes it takes hours to get that.
And I would imagine when you hit that comedy note, whatever Game of Thrones politics is happening in the office, whatever jockeying for positions happening, whatever frustrations people are having, if what you blurt out happens to be so obviously right and funny that despite all of that, there's kind of a unanimous vote with everyone's belly laugh, then you have to have known. Like, do you remember did you ever have that moment where despite everything you came in with the zinger that all of a sudden, like, that's the line, it's going to show up in a
that
thing?
happens. I mean, ideally that will be happening 20 or 30 times a day.
Yeah.
And not just for me, but from everybody. And that's how that's how you make progress. And unfortunately, the later at night it gets, the more slower down it gets, and then the less funny it gets. But some places also, and I should say this, The Simpsons was a rare, at least back then, was a rare type of writer's room, because a lot of the writers' rooms that I've heard about, and I won't say any of the shows or the people involved with them, are toxic in some way. Mm-hmm. And the people, because sometimes there's people who don't have a bad home life and don't want to go home and want to make this their family and want to stay there all night.
They're doing something other than the stated job.
Yes. They're keeping this prison. They're keeping 10 people prisoner there to amuse them all night long. And then, like, sometimes they have they keep them there all night long. They make them work on weekends. Or they just they never work on the fucking script. They just want to talk. They want to shoot the shit. They want to talk dirty all day, whatever. And so, like, I'd say there are lots of writers' rooms in sitcoms, especially back in those days, before places got nervous about that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. Yeah. that companies were like, you can't talk like that in writer's room. That now, there were so many shows where people were just being held prisoners by lunatics.
Yeah.
The Simpsons was not like that. Everybody was pretty domestic. There were not, to my knowledge, any drug users. There were not any alcoholics. It was kind of a crop of people who were all wanted to make the show funny, but were not crazy. And so it was kind of, but it also wasn't like, there were very few stories of conflict. There was one time, only one time did somebody yell at someone else. The entire time I was there, and it was about whether the air conditioning was up too high or not.
Yeah.
Right? And that was it. But like every time, 2 times. But anyway, but yes, in general, it was a pretty collegial group of people who all got along to a certain extent.
Yeah. So you guys are new kids on the block.
What time is it, by the way?
Oh shoot, we got to speed things up.
What time is it now?
It's 4:30.
Well, we've got 30 minutes. That's plenty of time.
Okay, good. All right. So you guys start to tell me about the moment when you begin to realize, oh my God, we are making it within the Simpsons universe. Like
when Josh and I realized we were taking.
Yeah.
Well, what happened was that there was a number of unique occurrences that allowed us to become the most senior writers after only being there for a year. Like almost all the original writers left at the end of season 4. Because this was the golden era of what was called the development deal, mm-hmm. where places would give you a lot of money to make up a sitcom, right? And so lots of people did, like, for instance, Mike Reese and Al Jean made up The Critic, which is pretty successful, and other writers went off to do the same thing. And so you didn't want to work at The Simpsons when you could make twice as much money sitting in your own office on your hours making up a show that might make you a fortune.
Right.
So so almost all the original writers left at the end of season 4, except for us and Conan, and another guy named Dan McGrath who had been hired only a month earlier. And so for about 3 or 4 months, there was no one in charge of the show, and it was just us and Conan and Dan McGrath making up stuff for season 5 by ourselves. And we'd go to Malibu and have seafood and stuff like that, and like drive around in Conan's car and shoot the shit about ideas for season 5, but on kind of a loose schedule. It was that was the funnest time that we had there. Then they brought in a new showrunner named David Merkin, who was a funny guy who'd been on other shows like Newhart and things like that, and had his own shows. And he took over. He started hiring a whole bunch of new people, and who stayed there for several years. And then also a few months into that, Conan suddenly became the famous talk show host.
Yeah.
So he left.
Yeah.
And so now we were the most senior guys. We'd been longer than anyone else on the show. We'd only been there for a little over a year, right? And so what happened was there was a number of times where, put this delicately, I'd say Josh and I became frustrated with the way things were running because they weren't running the way that we were used to. Mm-hmm. They were running in a different way. And there were lots of new people, some of whom, in our opinion, did not know what they were doing. But they had titles that were much, much higher than our titles. So we complained. And also that worked. They were like, we complained to the guy who was the guy who kind of ran the business aspect of the show. And we're like, we've been here for our scripts, blah, 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 blah. These guys are new and they don't know what they're doing. And so they gave us a huge promotion. We didn't get a raise, but they bumped us up like 5 levels,
right?
In terms of.
I would imagine that's a huge unlock for your creativity to know that you have the authority to just run, to start sprinting.
Yeah. Also because we were writing some good stuff at that time, not to blow our own horns, but also we were so the guy who took over let us write 5 episodes a year. So we weren't in the room very much at all during season 5 and 6. Josh and I wrote 5 episodes, time-consuming job. So we wrote 5 scripts in each of season 5 and 6, many of which that were pretty well received, like Lisa versus Malibu Stacy and Child to Bob Roberts and Who Shot Mr. Burns and things like that. So when David Merkin decided it was time for him, when he wanted to leave, people didn't stay for more than 2 years running that show at that time. It was traditional to leave for 2 years. He recommended us for the job. God bless him. So we got the job, and we said we're only going to do it for 1 year, and they were like, "You got to do it for 2 years," and we said no.
Whoa!
We said no. We're not going to do it for 1 year. We're going to do it for 1 year because we don't know how much we're going to like it or whatever. And they said no, and they spent about 6 months looking for someone else to run the show, and they finally came back and said, "Okay, you can run it for a year." And then we ran it for a year, and in our estimation and some other people's, we did a good job.
This is which season?
7.
Okay. What are some of the things most people will remember from that season? Just a couple of them.
Oh, the King Size Homer, where he gains all that weight. I don't know, a lot of ones that people like.
Yeah.
A lot of, I can't remember which ones were season 7 and which ones were season 8. So I'll just say a lot of ones that people have.
Yeah. Okay, no, but that places it, yeah.
So then we were able to negotiate a really good deal to stay for 1 more year after that.
Yeah.
And at that point, we also decided that we were like, everyone had taken that job for 2 years. We'd taken it for 2 years, and it was time for us to go. And we also thought, like, this show's not going to be on for much long. This is the wrongest thing anyone thought. Now, this show's still on now. What is it, season 35 or whatever? But keep in mind, almost no sitcoms had ever been on for that long.
Yeah.
Like, I think MASH went on for 8 or 9 seasons. Cheers went on for 10.
Yeah.
Seinfeld went on for 9 or 10. And we were at the end of season 8.
Yeah, where it's like, well, clearly they're shutting down the lights.
And the ratings weren't very good. Like The Simpsons, people think The Simpsons was a smash. It was a smash hit for 2 years, and then it settled into a comfortable number 59 every week. And we were number 59 out of like 120 shows every week. And we were always beat by Touched by an Angel, which was on at the same time, and Mad About You, which is on at the same time, which is like, Mad About You, God, crushed us every week. And so we were also like, so at the end of season 8, we're like, this show's not going to be around for much longer. We don't want to be the ones who break it. We did a good job, and let's get out of here and get our own development deal. And we did, and that's when we created Mission Hill.
Oh, and this is where your name and I think more of, if I read this correctly, more of your authentic energy and story comes out in Mission Hill? Like, or tell me about
a lot of the stuff that we had used. I mean, the Mission Hill was a reaction to The Simpsons in a way. I mean, Mission Hill has very much the grammar of The Simpsons in its bones, its story, the way the stories are constructed, but it's a whole different set of characters because in The Simpsons, there's no characters between the ages of 12 and 35 except for Otto. Period.
Yeah, and he's
Otto
a cartoon of being 12.
He's not very fun to
yeah.
write for. So we were like, let's make a show where most of the characters are those ages. And that's how we came up with Mission Hill, which is the story of a 24-year-old guy and his brother who's 17. So we got a young guy, first jobs, crappy jobs, dating, and a high school student, both of which had never been covered in The Simpsons. And so we had sold that show. We were very lucky to sell it to, well, at the time, it seemed like we were very lucky to sell it to this new network called the WB Network. Mm-hmm. They were very enthusiastic about it. They bought 13 episodes right off the bat, and we were like, this is the best. So we worked really hard, using all the same skills we had learned at The Simpsons, hired a new staff, very talented people, and worked with our animator friend, Lauren McMullen, best TV animator in Hollywood, and Oscar-nominated feature animator, too, to create this world of Mission Hill. And it was absolutely fantastic, best job of all time, until it got canceled after 2 episodes.
But you got to join. I mean, what I loved about Mission Hill and what spoke to me was that, number one, it touched on subjects that were way before internet culture would make them de rigueur, like Star Trek conventions, cosplay, relationship stuff. In fact, this came out post 9/11, right?
No, it came out in 1999.
Oh, because by the time I saw it, it was post 9/11, and there's this one episode
that seems eerily prescient.
Yes,
9/11, doesn't
yes,
it? Yes,
and the one where you reference the
crisis,
unnamed
crisis,
the phrase, the unnamed crisis, where everyone's like, "What do you want?" And they all mumble, "When do we want it?" And then the phrase that is stuck in my mind has been like every so often, the whole world takes one of these media snow days.
Yeah.
And then having seen that after 9/11, I was like, wow. It was, I guess that show hit Adult Swim, who went around and scooped up all the misfit toys that never got the love that they deserved and put them in one bucket.
Saved a lot of money because it was a Warner Brothers operation. Adult Swim was a Time Warner operation. So they went to the Warner Brothers vault and said, give us every canceled thing you have that we can run for no money.
Yep.
And God bless, we never heard, even though our show, Mission Hill, ran over and over and over for years, those same 13 episodes on Adult Swim, we never heard from anyone at Adult Swim. We never got a single phone call or email from anyone at Adult Swim. But it doesn't matter because it
was just catalog content.
Yes.
Yeah.
But that's where all our fans came from. And that's like, we have fans, Mission Hill fans to this day. And that's how we sold out 30 shows in all these cities, showing it in movie theaters just this past year with fans. And there's probably about 150 fans in every city, but that was enough to fill up a small movie theater.
Yeah. Well. So, So, do you get word that there's a whole generation of people who, because I'd imagine thing comes out, or you got canceled 2 episodes in by the WB, you're like, well, that's the end of that chapter, and then. But then do you get word that you're getting a crop of fans from essentially?
Not really, because this was, again, still kind of in the very early days of the internet. And so you'd see, occasionally there'd be something, people post up Mission Hill or whatever on Tumblr or something like that. But we didn't it wasn't like people were emailing us, and there wasn't like Mission Hill. There was a couple of Mission Hill fan accounts, but they were kind of ones that were left over from the WB airing.
Yeah.
So we didn't really know about that. We didn't really start hearing about it until those people started to be college age,
Yeah.
A lot of people saw Mission Hill, especially people, by the way, one of the things that was unique about Mission Hill was the gay couple, Gus and Wally.
Yeah, and the fact that I always respected the fact that it was a nothing burger, and I respect it even more knowing that it came out late 90s.
It was the first gay kiss ever broadcast on television, we were told.
Really?
Yeah, and we won an award from GLAAD, and so a lot of the time, I would say at least 20% of every audience that we encounter are people who are gay or lesbians who saw that show on TV, and it was like, that was the first time I ever saw a gay couple on TV where it wasn't a joke that they were gay.
Yeah.
And so we've had a lot of people come up to us at every one of these shows and say that stuff. So it's an interesting story.
Yeah. So do you, after Mission Hill gets canceled, fill in the gap, because I know that 20 years later, Brian Brushwood encounters Space 1969. And to anybody seeing us talk, I cannot recommend it highly enough. It's an Audible original. It's a radio play with Natasha Lyonne and an all-star cast of voices. It is fun, funny, punchy. I went in just knowing that I dig retro alt future 1960s stuff. I love radio plays. I love punchy humor. I love Natasha Lyonne. So I was just dazzled by the whole thing. And then I wrote you that unironic fan letter, and we got on each other's radar. But I guess the big news, quick plug, Space 1972 is coming and in production.
Yes, we started production. It took me 2.5 years to write the script. 683 pages. I wrote it all myself, 10 episodes, and we are now recording it. And hopefully it will be out, I guess, within a year, or maybe even sooner than that, with most, if not all of the original cast returning. Hopefully Natasha's deal is being negotiated right now, but it's exciting. I love this project. I'm so glad that I was able to somewhat bail out of the TV industry before it collapsed, because I've been working Audible as my main writing job for the past 5 years. And they generally, God bless them, let me do whatever I want. And then I record it just the way I want. And it became a surprise bestseller. So that's why they ordered the sequel.
It really is. Audible, because they have deep pockets and because they're playing the long game, they're kind of, for a comedy writer like you, the closest thing to a traditional broadcast institution where they're all like, go, be Bill Oakley, please.
No broadcast institution would ever have done that.
Sorry. Good point. But they would have at least made a play for more than a month at a time.
Right. They might do that for Ryan Murphy or Shonda Rhimes, but they wouldn't be doing it for me.
Right.
But Audible does, and they're great partners to work with, and they're very encouraging, and they let me, because this thing is so, when people listen to it, they will see this is not a project that's designed to appeal to the masses.
Yeah.
It's a very specific type of project that only a very specific type of person will like, but they like it and they really love it to some extent, because it's not like anything else that I've ever heard of. And I just say, I craft it lovingly. I spend so much time researching every little freaking detail.
Oh yeah, no, there is, as you listen to the whole thing, you can clearly hear Bill Oakley playing the game of how many very specific and period accurate brand names can I wedge in?
And precisely. And then also like and the production team at Audible and the people that I work with, Thomas Mann, who is my producer, we work so hard to like for instance, without spoiling too much, there's an episode of Laugh-In in Space 1969 that is so lovingly crafted, and we cast the perfect person to play Alan Seuss. Mm-hmm. Like every laugh and the music and everything about it, we made it sound just like a real episode of Laugh-In. And I'd say in Space 1972, there's even more of that, because there are shows, without getting into too much detail, 1972 is very different culturally than 1969, especially in my universe.
Yeah.
And so we're not talking about things like Laugh-In or Beverly Hillbillies. We're talking about things like All in the Family.
Yeah.
We're talking about a nation that is no longer in the thrall of Kennedy like they were in 1969. It's a little bit darker, a little bit more like revolutionary to some extent. So it's an interesting cultural change.
That's okay. So everybody needs to listen to that. But and I want to get to the most curious aspect to me is your food blogger persona. But is there anything in the 20-year gap that sticks out between Mission Hill?
This is after Josh and I started. We did another show that I love, but you can't see. You can see a little bit of it on YouTube, called The Mullets. Did you ever hear of The Mullets?
I remember hearing it. It was basically, it was kind of Joe Dirt-like.
Yeah, but much better written than Joe Dirt.
Like, yeah.
It was kind of like we wanted to do a live action Beavis and Butthead, and we were like, we're not going to be sophisticated with this show. We're just going to be really, really, really funny, and I still think it's hilarious. And some person has found some of the episodes and put them on YouTube. And they make me laugh. They're stupid, but it's like stupid, like Dumb and Dumber. It's like, that's funny. It's
Yeah,
funny.
yeah.
So we did that. We also,
that sort of base level slapstick, followed by turning to the camera and saying, "That's it. That's the
Yes.
joke. No meta commentary. That's it."
it was really popular with the audience too, but like it just didn't have the ratings because again they put it on opposite with a romantic comedy right before, and like it was another one of those things when the time it's not so important now what time you're on. Back then it was important. So we did a whole bunch of other projects too. That we did a lot of pilots, things that almost got on the air that didn't get on the air, and then around 2009, I decided that I wanted to move to Portland. So that was when Josh and I stopped working together because it was also because we couldn't afford to work together because splitting a salary, two guys with a family having to split one salary is just not feasible in LA. So we both have worked on a lot of different projects since then. But we worked on some together too. Notably, I worked on Portlandia, from Portland, and I worked on a number of other shows that you would never heard of. And then we also both worked on Disenchantment. Josh was the showrunner of Disenchantment, which was Matt Groening's third show on Netflix, and I worked on that for a season. And then I was also the head writer of Close Enough, which is a show from the creator of Regular Show.
Oh, yeah.
It was a hilarious show, but also was a victim of this corporate thing. When Warner Brothers was sold to Discovery, they canceled 70 animated projects at HBO, and they shut down the whole studio. Cartoon Network studio is gone. And so this whole show was erased from existence. So that was a great show. And then right around that time was when I started. It was like, maybe TV is too much of a flaming garbage dumpster fire, and started to transition into Audible.
Well, so okay, I want to talk about the awesome non sequitur of one of your many lives of being a food blogger connoisseur of, I don't want to be rude and call it garbage food, but fast food.
I don't. It's more people. I would say it's elevated lowbrow food is the most accurate description someone's ever given.
Elevated lowbrow.
I don't
food.
do quite as much fast food as I used to do. It's more, or the food of the common man. Another guy said. So I do. Yes, I do. I literally half of my time and probably half of my career now are food related things, and it's not. I have an Instagram, but I've also expanded into a lot of, and what I do, I'm not doing food like I'm not going to Lutece, I'm not going to Alinea or whatever it is in Chicago. I'm going to find the Italian beef. In Chicago, I'm going to find the Detroit style pizza. I'm going to find the North Shore roast beef sandwich outside of Boston and that type of thing. And that's the kind of food that I like.
Yeah.
So I do things on my Instagram about that, but it's also expanded into other universes now. Because I'm a regular on the show, The Food That Built America, on the History Channel, which seems to be one of their biggest hits based on how many times they seem to rerun it.
Yeah.
So I'm known as a food commentator. And I also have a couple other things. Like you may know that I wrote this thing called Steamed Hams.
That's what I was going to ask.
Okay.
Is unpack the curious symbiotic relationship. Like, which came first, the food blogging career or the unmitigated viral sensation of steamed hams on Steamed Hams?
Around the same time, and that's why they are symbiotic. Because in an episode of Simpsons called 22 Short Films, there's a number of little sketches about various Simpsons characters, and I wrote this one about Superintendent Chalmers coming to lunch at Principal Skinner's house, and Principal Skinner trying to cover up the fact that he burned the roast by replacing it with fast food. He calls them steamed hams. Steamed hams in the sketch is a euphemism for hamburgers.
Yeah.
And I wrote this thing, and I didn't hear anything about it for 20 years until it suddenly became this huge meme, right? in 2014, it started becoming a meme in Australia, and then it kind of circled the globe. And by 2018, it was literally voted the Internet Meme of the Year. And I was like, around 2018, I was like, this is when I started getting interested in doing food stuff. And I was like, steamed hams is a euphemism for hamburgers. I can connect this to my food thing. So I have a club called the Steamed Ham Society, but I've worked with a brewery to release Steamed Hams Lager. And now the best part is, I'm so excited about this. I have just gotten the trademark for steamed hams as a food product.
Oh, that's amazing.
And you would think that it would belong to Disney because they own all this Simpsons, right? But they either didn't notice or they failed to notice that I had trademarked.
Well, but also I would imagine that steamed hams is just two words that are funny together. But if they can't trademark and possess every two-word combination that's funny.
Well, they do. I mean, it's a little shocking to me that they don't sell those at Krusty Burger at the Universal Studios, for example.
Oh yeah.
They have a whole menu of things of Simpsons jokes that they sell at Universal Studios that they don't sell steamed hams. So anyway, either the Disney lawyers didn't care or failed to notice that I was trademarking this. And now I'm going to be releasing, it's still in the planning stages, Steamed Ham's hamburgers.
Congratulations.
Now, whether they'll be frozen or whether they'll be at a licensed product at various restaurants remains to be seen. So those are some of my food enterprises. But now, reaching our apex of this story is my Ticketed Dinner series.
Yeah, okay. So this is a new thing that I don't think I'm talking out of school to say you speak freely about a lot of stuff, but this one you've been kind of playing close to the vest.
It's a secret because that's part of the thing. Like the menu is a secret, so I don't talk about it. But as I said, I think we began the interview with this. Traveling the country for the Mission Hill tour, I tried a lot of unusual local foods. And I was like, how come I can't get a North Shore roast beef sandwich in my hometown? How come I can't have Ohio Valley style pizza in my hometown? And I realized I did some research and some more tastes. There's hundreds of these things, hundreds of regional dishes that are, in some cases, really good, either super crazy or really good or both, that you can't get within 20 miles of the place that they're normally sold. And I was like, I want to try these dishes. So I decided to collaborate with restaurants around the country to create a menu. We have it's a ticketed dinner event. We have a whole night of a 7-course meal, which is nothing but these items. And they're items, I keep it a secret because each one is a surprise as it comes out of the kitchen.
That's part of what you're buying. When you buy a ticket, it's like, I don't want to know. It's like a magic show, basically. It's like you're going to go and then the magic of like, oh my God, how did this even happen?
Precisely. And I do a funny talk that goes along with it. I talk about these funny items. I tell some behind the scenes Simpsons stories and just generally talk about the comedy of American
Basically, your job is to show up at B. Bill Oakley.
That's what you're paying for. In addition to your I'm not going to even say what the food items are.
We almost got him.
I'm not going to tell you what the items are, but they are all. There's no testicles. Well, maybe there will be testicles in some of them. I'm not going to even say that. There's no organ meats. Okay. I don't think.
No, you ain't playing Fear Factor when you go.
There's nothing gross. I don't want people to be grossed out, and I don't want people to go home feeling sick.
You're paying for a good time. Yes, maybe exotic. No, not anything you're going to be ashamed of.
I would say in Portland when we did this, everyone was delighted with the items. People got a little full and asked for like boxes to take the later courses home, but everybody was really delighted and surprised by the items.
That's awesome. Okay, and where can people check in?
People should follow my Instagram or I now have a mailing list because the Instagram.
Which is? Instagram?
Well, or my website, BillOakley.com.
Bill Oakley.
But you can get on the mailing list. I have it. It's pinned to all my Twitter. I'm that Bill Oakley on every social media and pinned my mailing list, pinned to the thing, you'll get it. But I will say the dinners are Austin so far.
Yep.
There's Austin, Cincinnati, Omaha in June. There's San Diego and Boston, I think, in July. There's at least a dozen, and they're all in various stages of gelling. But if you follow me on social media or sign up for the mailing list, you will be informed.
So I will vouch for anybody watching this that Bill Oakley is just follow him and interact with him on the socials, and sooner or later he's going to come to your hometown. And it is not a joke that you are the approachable, down-to-earth kind of guy who would love to. I was talking with one of your friends who we're going to have on the Modern Show later. But it's like so many people, it's like, oh, I'd like to come out and see that. And you're like, oh, what's this really about? But with Bill Oakley, it's like, he really did. He just wanted to come out and see it. That's great. Super sincere, down-to-earth human being that I'm so deeply, deeply flattered that you came out to the compound. And thank you for being Bill Oakley. Thank you for your gifts to the world and for being the kind of person who would be a friend of the Modern Rogue.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be your friend. It's a pleasure to come out here and barbecue on your grill, whatever I'm in town.
No, that's great. Yeah, we're 2 for 2. This guy, he steams a fine ham. I can say that much.
Technically, they're grilled. As Superintendent Chalmers would say.
You're breaking the illusion. You're killing me. That's great. We'll do a little fade-out thing on that. Very nice. That was awesome. Yeah, that was fantastic. Hey, thank you.